My name is Julia Bulent Temel. This interview is for a project for the University of Cincinnati's graduate program. The class is the role of teachers in democratic society. Today I have with me Bulent Temel. He is a resident of Turkey, and he completed his primary, secondary, and undergraduate degree in Turkey. After that, he traveled abroad to the U.S., where he received his master's degree. Currently, he is a PhD candidate at a Turkish university. This has given him a particularly interesting view of education, both in Turkey and abroad in the U.S., and has given him a very unique sight into the education systems. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for your invitation.
All right, well, to start the interview, I'd like to talk a little bit about the differences between the Turkish education and the U.S. education. But first, we'll start off with, what do you think the main purpose of education in any country is?
I think the main purpose of education is to give the students or new generations of the society with what they need to respond to things that are happening in life. It is maybe a peculiar way of thinking or acting in the society, so that there's social harmony in the society, and the society continues the way that it is supposed to. Like I'm talking about some very main principles like democracy, citizens respecting each other, people having their rights and exercising them and stuff like that. Some like main principles of the society like that. And I think a good, well-educated person is the one who have internalized all those reflexes of how to respond to things that are happening in their lives, so that it's compatible with the purpose of the society he lives in.
Well, in that system of education, what do you think the role of teachers are?
I think it's to unleash that that skill that I just mentioned. Basically, show students that they be a good role model for the students, the way that that they're supposed to exist in society, act and treat one another, how to think too. For example, what we call rationality is something that we mostly learn from outside sources, and teachers are a primary part of them. How to think rationally and how to respond to things happening. So, but I think also, of course, I'm in higher education now, and in higher education, I think the purpose is the overall goal of the teacher could be slightly different from the earlier education, that because you're trying to train a person for a particular line of business, maybe in a way you can say, maybe chemistry, mathematics, or what have you. And I think the key role of a higher educator would be to stimulate interest and relate that subject material to their lives, so that college kids would be raised in such way that they don't study things just because the diploma that's gonna, and the doors that college diploma is gonna open to them. Whereas in the earlier part of education, I think the main role of a teacher would be to give students a way of thinking that, in a way, to kind of unleash the capacity of every student, because every student is good in different things, and it's teacher's role to find that out and make him work on it and give him the message that it is okay that they pursue careers that in the fields that they're good at, instead of what the society wants them to do. Which I suspect you'll be asking me, because you already mentioned that you'll ask me what the difference between U.S. and Turkish system. I think that's one thing that's kind of missing in the Turkish system, that it's such a competitive environment that kids are not usually finishing up their educations, knowing what they want to do and what they are good at. But that's something we need to fix that.
So you've already mentioned that you think teachers' responsibility or part of their job is to unleash the promise of their students.
Mm-hmm.
In turn, what do you think the students' responsibility, either to teachers or society, would be?
I think they should do their best, whatever assignments they're given. It's just classic, expectations from all schools. Because if they try to, they have to put in an effort to explore what they are good at and what they are interested in. But if that desire is not there, it's kind of hard for them to really get something from their education. Of course, once again, it comes to teachers' role, that they would be the leaders in this pursuit in a way. But on top of that, if I have to mention something, I would say maybe they should have the courage to be unpopular. That's one thing that's missing in many educations, that unfortunately kids feel pressured to be popular, and that creates nothing but traditional societies that think traditionally, that do whatever the society expects them to do. But that's not really ideal, especially for like scholarship. If you want to raise people who generate ideas, who are innovative. And it doesn't have to be in the engineering fields either. It could be in even political science. You have to be able to think like the general society, but also have the courage to try different things and think differently. That's what makes you a leader. You have to lead, and in my opinion, you have to be a bit different from think outside the box in order to be able to lead them somewhere, because otherwise it's just the society doesn't go anywhere. So I think that's one thing. If I were a parent, then I would have my children to try thinking very differently. I would encourage that.
Well, thank you. If I had to, if I told you the phrase democratic education, what would you define that as?
Democratic education. I would say it's an education system that raises democratically thinking people in the most general sense, from students' perspective. That's what the term democratic education should refer to. And from the government sense, I think, or maybe even parents' viewpoint, we should say, it's an education system that gives chances to all segments of the society to get good education. So it depends on from what angle you're looking at it, but and what I mean by that is every part of the society needs to have access to good education that would create meaningful lives for them, and they would be able to accomplish themselves. That's, in my opinion, that's my conception of democratic education.
Thank you. Now, I just want to separate a little bit the Turkish style of education, the Turkish system of education. They are very different things. How do you think the Turkish system of education affected you? Like the system of testing and the system of private school versus public, which is very ingrained within society itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think for the viewers, we should give a little piece of information about Turkish system here, that there are 4 different types of, main types of, I should say, high schools in Turkey. One is the so-called Anatolian high schools, and that's where the students that take highest scores go to, and they're sponsored by the government, and their entire curriculum is in English, and they are pretty high quality educational institutes, and so all students there are pretty much on scholarships. In other words, they don't pay anything for their school, just a minimal amount. The second type is so-called fen lisesi, which means science high schools. And it's the science version of the first type of school I mentioned. Still, you have to have very high scores, and you're still sponsored by the government for this education, and it's a very high quality education as well. As you would imagine, those two are where everyone wants to go. So because of that, it's very highly competitive to get in, which is part of the problem. But the third type of school is the so-called high schools, and those high schools do not attract the students with high scores, and the education quality is a bit lower than the others, expectably. And the fourth kind is the private schools, just like in the U.S. The parents pay a good deal of money to send their kids out there, and they are in English language as well, and at least most of them are. And but they don't seem to attract the top students in the country. So, in my experience, the reason why I mention these different schools is because they seem to offer a different type of education to their students. Like a private high school graduate tends to have perhaps a little higher level of self-confidence, but on the other hand, there might be some discipline issues on there. Whereas a Anatolian high school, for instance, students would be much more disciplined. They would be on top of their studies and very good students, etc. However, the social skills seem to lack a little bit in those, and similarly with the science high schools, etc. So it depends on which one you went to. It really does matter a lot. It's almost as obvious as just seeing a person on the street and talking with him for a few minutes and then decide, even kind of get an idea of what type of a high school he's graduated. That's how obvious the outcomes are often. In my personal experience, I went to one of the Anatolian high schools, so I find myself, being raised somewhat passionately for knowledge. I think that was the main thing I got from my education, that they made us excited about knowledge, whatever field it may be. So the school, studying, academic things, they were all fun, good things, But on the other hand, I don't find my fellow classmates to being as multi-talented as some others. Like at the private schools, kids usually can play different musical instruments. They're engaged in various types of sports, etc. Maybe a little volunteering things would be, but these were not the things that we were as much into, which is the downside of the education.
Now,